All toddlers have one thing in common, a lifetime of unpredictable events ahead. But data tells us they are already experiencing their most significant brain development by age 5. And by then, we actually can predict some of what's ahead for them. So how do we make the most of these critical early years? Stay tuned.
And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned.
All right, welcome to the show tonight. To start us off, we have Nancy Cambria from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Children and Families reporter. But before we talk, Nancy, let's take a look at why early childhood is so important.
Big things are happening in the minds of our littlest people. Children develop much of their learning capacity in the first 3 years of life, a critical time when young brains grow to 90% of their adult weight. But how do we truly seize these precious years for learning and development? The most popular answer? Early childhood. And when it comes to child well-being, social, emotional, and educational, the data tells us that a child's environment matters. Studies show that when it's time to start school, children of low socioeconomic status are already behind, scoring 2 years behind on language tests. In fact, signs of this vocabulary gap are already evident before a child even turns 2. A recent regional study only reinforced the benefits of investing in our young people, stating that every dollar invested in early childhood education yields between $7 and $17 of social benefit.
Ready?
Early quality learning programs have also been shown to reduce costs later on programs like special education, remedial instruction, and even incarceration. What about way later? By age 40, children who have high-quality early education are more likely to own a home, be employed, and earn more in their career. So what's not to like? Discussions around early childhood aren't so much about the if, but more about the how. That's because early childhood education can come in many forms, taking place in homes, classrooms, and institutions, formally and informally, in preschools, on playgrounds, and across the country.
Okay, so we're back with Nancy. What is the state of early childhood in Missouri, in St. Louis, in the Metro East?
Well, I think that people are really understanding its significance. I think the general public is starting to understand that brain development happens earlier and that it has a significant impact, especially for kids who are poor or maybe in homes where their parents aren't there as much for them. I think the issue for Missouri, though, is trying to translate that into meaningful programs, and also, even at the most earliest ages, figuring out how to really get their child cares monitored and regulated, and so that they're not only safe and healthy, but they also get some elements of quality in them. And that starts as early as infancy, where parents are really looking for child care.
So what are parents telling? What are their options?
Well, it's a mixed bag. I think nobody really tells a mom at their baby shower, hey, what are your options? What are you going to do? How are you going to pay for child care? How are you going to pay for early childhood education? But that's coming up before they even pay for college, way before. So, these are issues that parents really have to grapple with quickly, and they have a newborn in the household, and they want to do the best for them. And trying to figure out what is the best for my child? What care situation will work for our family? What can we afford? And then also, how will this down the line translate into early childhood education? What facilities will I use? So it can be very overwhelming. And one thing that people really can rely on, or they hope to be able to rely on, are states' ability to kind of look at those first daycares and how they're regulated, and is there enough oversight? Is there enough curriculum? What are the kind of things that are going to help my child develop and feel secure, and to learn those really early social emotional stages?
So what are legislators, is this a priority to legislators?
Unfortunately, no, I don't think so. I think, unfortunately, with Missouri, we're still trying to figure out the bare bones minimums about what we have for our children. And unfortunately, I think in Missouri, we're not really quite there yet beyond basic safety standards. And in Missouri, we still have very loose regulation in terms of how we actually look at child care, what child cares actually are licensed and what are not. We allow a great swath of child cares to be unregulated in churches and schools. We allow home daycares to be unlicensed. And all that means for parents is that the safety net that they may think they have, if they're not educated about this, may not be there for them.
Do some people want it that way? I mean, is this the realm of parents in the minds of some people? They don't want government interfering in this kind of early stage?
I think it's a mixed bag again. I think that in rural areas, it's a little scary to think about if you're relying on home daycares to have this sort of sense of government in your homes telling you, how many kids you can care for. But I think in general, there's a overall feeling, I think, by parents in some areas that this is taken care of for them already, when that may not really be the case.
St. Louis, we know, is the birthplace of parents as teachers.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, the first public kindergarten.
Right.
But now we, in this conversation, we hear about states like Oklahoma, which we're going to hear from later. How is Missouri doing? Where are we behind? Is that a fair thing to even kind of qualify?
Well, I think Oklahoma's taken some great steps early on with some incidents that happened in the news that made them really think about ratios in homes and regulation. And I think Missouri is catching up in that area. I think that there have been some things in the last couple of years that have brought attention to the legislature about safety and health that have brought some incremental changes, but we still have a way to go in that area. I think that some areas of the state maybe haven't put the thought in, particularly in some urban areas, as to civically what it takes to create a system of good early childhood care and then early childhood education. I know Kansas City is doing a fairly decent job on getting their business community involved. That's something that I think St. Louis needs to work on more significantly, and I know that people are trying in that area.
You mentioned rural. Does it break down? Is it significantly different what parents have as options in rural and urban areas, and then I'm guessing across a lot of other lines too when it comes to economics?
Sure, it's very difficult to find licensed care in rural areas, and it is expensive licensed care. There's more reliance on home daycares and those kind of settings. Certainly. Last year there was a legislature from Barry County, which is in the southwestern part of the state, who had actually asked filed a bill to lift some of the regulation off of rural daycares. That didn't go very far. So you see there is a really wide difference of opinions on whether or not we should have these kind of standards in Missouri. But Missouri is also doing a good job this year on following through on some federal guidelines on their daycares that receive subsidy. Federally, they've asked each state to come up with a way to monitor the daycares that receive child care subsidy to help support low-income children get the child care they need so their parents can work. And that in Missouri will equate to having more monitoring in certain daycares that were not licensed. There will be some sense of quality standards that will have to be relayed to parents. This is all still being developed, but this is very exciting. It will affect about 4,000 daycares who previously had been unmonitored. It will not be the whole swath of daycares in Missouri, but it is a significant step.
Nancy Cambria from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Thanks for laying the groundwork for us here. We want to hear from you on this topic as well, so find us online, #StayTunedSTL. Okay, let's have a discussion here about let's make the case for what we're talking about here in early childhood. Let me introduce who we're talking to at this table. Sue Steepleton from the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University. Also from the Brown School, Jason Purnell, welcome back to the show. And welcome back to Terry Jones from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Terry, I'll start with you. Why are we having this conversation in the first place? What makes this so important?
What makes it important is that this is a great return on investment. The best studies done on early childhood education and its impact used randomized experiments on 2 programs, one in Michigan and one in North Carolina. And those programs were started and done and completed in the 1960s and 70s, and researchers followed those individuals, still are following them up to the present time. And when you crunch all the numbers in terms of the outcomes, it's a $7 to 1 return on investment in early childhood education.
Value. Is there research that shows us even beyond the dollars, and have you seen the same kind of thing that Terry's talking about?
Yeah, there are other studies that have, I mean, whatever the figures are. Is it 1 to 7? Is it 1 to 16? Is it 1 to 3? There's plenty of data there. I would be remiss, though, if we didn't start with, it's also the right thing to do, to get children started. The little video clip that you showed at the beginning, things happen in those early years that affect every domain of a child's development. So do we care about nurturing children in a healthy manner? We do care about that. So I think that ought to be said. But Terry starts at exactly the right place, whether you like children or not. It is an economic investment in community success.
It struck me out, we were talking to Nancy there, that you think about how much time those families fortunate enough to send their kids to college spend thinking about sending their kids to college. But are we spending that kind of time thinking about the first few years?
Well, interestingly enough, you talked about the state of Oklahoma, and actually intervening on saving for college is also one of the things that Oklahoma is experimenting with. And what they found is when they randomize these children to receive either a $1,000 college savings account or not at birth, 3 or 4 years later, when these children are just 3 or 4 years old, you see better social and emotional functioning in the children who have these accounts. You see mothers who have these accounts for their children have lower levels of depressive symptoms. So there are many things we mean when we say early childhood intervention.
Is it more than reading or preparing to learn how to read, preparing to learn how to go to school? Is it more than that?
Depends on your definition of preparing to learn how to go to school. Is it more than reading? Absolutely it is. There are others who will speak tonight about social emotional development, healthy children, whole developmental patterns that mean children, whether a child knows the alphabet by the time they're 3 or not is clearly irrelevant. What is important is they know social behaviors, they're acquiring language, they're acquiring concepts, they're used to seeing books around, they're preparing. And your question about parents think a lot about going to college. Well, the beauty of this evening is connecting American Graduate to early childhood. Whether parents are thinking consciously or not, that early childhood placement, that developmental stuff when the child's an infant, is going to get the child off on a track to successful college.
There is a spirited debate, though, on the share of the instruction that should be academic related as opposed to social emotional. Yeah, and while everybody thinks both should be involved, not everybody thinks the same fraction should be spent on each.
Great, so let's do it. Why are we not all doing this?
Because it's expensive. The 2 studies I referenced that have proven the success more than any other social science experiment could do, if we costed them out in 2014 dollars, cost about $11,000 per student per year. And so that type of, which is about what we spend in Missouri on a K through 12 student. But to take cohorts of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and we have about 80,000 children in each of those age cohorts in Missouri, and multiply that by 11,000, you've got a pretty big number.
But there's another piece to the economic piece of this puzzle. So there was a study that was published on one of those studies, the children in one of those studies in North Carolina, where we find that 35 years later, the children who were in that intensive early childhood programming had better health profiles. Mm-hmm. So they were at lower risk for some of the metabolic diseases that lead to heart disease and stroke. They had lower levels of pre-hypertension, pre-diabetes. They were less likely to be obese. And when you think about the 16% of GDP we spend on healthcare, that investment early in life looks pretty minuscule compared to that.
I'm really excited about this connection with health. And the reason for that is the economic arguments, which seem irrefutable, but they've been used over and over and over and haven't turned the tide yet. So this connection with a new area that everybody can relate to and everybody is concerned about, I think could broaden the scope of interest, extend the scope of interest. I think another reason we haven't done enough about this in a societal sense is the lack of political power. And children don't have a strong voice. We spend more on the elderly percentage-wise, and we should. I support that. However, the proportional investment is much greater in young children. So directing political power, community voice, and maybe the health arguments will be able to strengthen beyond the economic.
Am I right to this health, the effect on the health outcomes? That sounds a little bit like the For Sake of All recommendations.
It is. So one of the reasons our number one recommendation is invest in high quality early childhood development is because it has all of these positive effects across the board, including health as one of those outcomes.
Can we be practical for parents? What should they be looking for when they're having these decisions to make in early childhood care?
Start with good prenatal care and access to good prenatal care. I mean, don't even wait till the baby's born, because the development happens so soon. And I think the holistic approach, holistic learning, safety for their children, health outcomes, connecting to all of the things that are going to be needed for success, all essential.
But it's a sharp contrast for what we have in K through 12 education, public education, where you can go on to the state's Department of Elementary and Secondary Education website and get performance records for each of the buildings in the state. There's no counterpart to that for early childhood education.
Any
But
advice?
you do want a focus on language acquisition, on social and emotional development, a teacher-to-student ratio that is reasonable. There are kind of indicators of quality that you can look for.
Sue, Jason, Terry, thank you all very much for being here. Stick around if you can. We'll bring you back at the end of the show with everyone at the same time. Okay, this week the producer of this show, Margie Enright, pulled double duty and went out into the community to talk to some parents about the options that they feel like they have.
It's really cool over here. You want to see it?
Okay. There's a spider
Meet the
web.
Weggy family. Sloan is 2 years old.
So she's very easy, very calm, but funny. She's got a pretty wicked sense of humor.
And big brother Clark just turned 3.
From the time he wakes up till the time he goes to bed, he's just on the move. He's just so curious.
With parents Carrie and Brandon working full-time, the kids attend daycare.
I was concerned, should one of us stay home? And maybe that would be, my mom stayed home with us, and so I thought, is that the best route for us to go? Should we consider that? We thought, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But actually what we found, and I say this all the time, is I think they actually learn a lot more being at daycare, and then all the ancillary things that we do outside of that. Not only being with the teachers and learning the different language and those types of things that maybe I wouldn't even think about or would have to think harder about doing with them, but they also learn so much just by being with their peers.
And with learning as a priority, the lessons don't stop when these little ones leave the classroom. Tonight, the kids get a visit from Annette Cook. Parents as Teachers, founded and headquartered here in Missouri, provides families with parent educators like Miss Annette, bringing strategies and support into the home to help parents promote learning.
Okay, should we turn the page?
On everything from language development to potty training.
We all know that the brain develops more in those first 5 years of life than any other time of life. So it's a very pivotal point in a child's development. And so just supporting parents and making sure that their children are on track. If we do see a sign of a delay or something, then we work alongside with parents to make sure that they get the help that they need.
Rhonda Davis is a stay-at-home mom, raising 2 toddlers of her own.
I find it important as me being their first teacher and showing them that I'm here for them and their protector.
Today's lesson is in Fairgrounds Park, and there's a lot to learn.
Go to the top. How big is it? This big?
But the kids aren't the only ones constantly learning.
Guy from here?
Rhonda often trades tactics with fellow parents through Project Launch, an initiative targeting North St. Louis families and providing early childhood resources.
Whether it be nutrition or, their health, it's like an outlet. It gives parents a chance to, express themselves. We can say what we're going through.
For both families, one thing is clear.
Banana! Do you like
Whatever the method, with little ones, it's all about those little victories.
I can't see.
The time when teaching moments become learning moments.
Oh, now I can. Okay, good. So one of the books that we have is, I think it's Polar Bear, What Do You Hear? And so each page is another animal. And Clark was the first, but, as soon as you would turn the page, he would tell what the animal was. And so it got to the point where I wasn't even really talking so much as he was kind of reading it to me. That was just kind of mind-blowing.
It's like a light bulb for me because I'm seeing the connection. I go over things on a daily basis and they may not catch on. I wonder if you know what color that is.
White!
Yes! When you see the connection that what you've taught them and then later on they can recognize, it's such a great feeling.
Early childhood education, in all its forms, is about readiness, creating kids who are socially, emotionally, and educationally prepared.
When they do go to school, it won't seem like an unfamiliar place. They won't feel withdrawn or anything like that. It'll be better for them to enter into that whole new world, so to speak.
For Stay Tuned, I'm Margie Enright.
You like the swing?
Thanks, Margie. Okay, let's talk more about these available options to parents with our next table. I'll do some introductions. First, Donna Hunt O'Brien with Parents as Teachers, as we mentioned, started in St. Louis. And secondly, we have Steve Zwolak, University City Children's Center, and Elizabeth George from St. Louis Regional Early Childhood Council, also the Rome Group, also the Loom Institute with
Correct.
Steve.
Thank you.
What choices do parents have?
Well, parents, they have choices in home care, so family child care is somewhat what it's called, where there may be a regulated home, a registered home, there may be a licensed home. Sometimes there's something that's more informal. Sometimes it's called kith and kin care. So it's relatives possibly taking care of kids. Also, of course, there are child care centers. Mm-hmm. There are preschools. There's preschools connected to our districts. There's private and public, all different options.
Well, and I think, with all those different options and what we now know, what the brain research is telling us, and we have 100 years of theory, and to still have those kinds of options without some form of understanding about what's really going on in centers. And we know, and I think it was expressed earlier, what happens early in life lasts a lifetime. So taking this early childhood framework really serious about what are those options and what are they really providing for children.
Mm-hmm. Of course, different families have different options. I mean, that almost goes without saying. Fair?
Fair, very fair. And I was lucky enough to be able to have my children in an accredited early childhood center when they were young, and yet parents that's expensive. It's not easy for the majority of parents. In our community, we're blessed with some Head Start and early Head Start funds that make accredited facilities available for parents who may not have the resources to pay for that. And that's a wonderful thing, but that's very limited. And Head Start and early Head Start really only pays for 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So we have to look to other resources for the pre-care and post-care. And given that those are programs that you need to be in school or you need to be working, well, it's really hard to find a job where you can drop your child off at 9, at 9 and pick them up at 3. That's just not really an option for many families. One thing that's relatively new is the school districts offering, as Donna mentioned, the school districts offering more pre-K. That's usually 3-4, sometimes 4-5, sometimes it's half day, sometimes it's full day. I had one parent say to me the other day, well, my half day is 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So even though that's not St. Louis Public Schools, St. Louis Public Schools is offering all day and free, and they are also offering pre and post care also free. So there are other options, but they're limited. I think, I couldn't remember the ratio, I think it's like 1 to 4, the number of preschool slots to the number of children of that age in the city of St. Louis. So it's tough to find.
I think one of the biggest challenges is for families to figure out how to sort this out. Right. What is quality? I mean, we're beginning to get to answer the question of access, but really identifying what are the quality indicators of a center. And some of them, you know, it's professional development of the caregivers is really a key piece. Having an emotionally responsive curriculum is a key piece. Having parents understand the messiness of early childhood. It's not linear like a typical school experience, and so when parents are out there looking, through their mind's eye, what they're seeing is what they remember, and usually what they remember is kindergarten or first grade.
That's right, and I think that's with parents, teachers, we talk to families a lot in preparation for this step, right? So we're talking to them about what to look for, but it's interesting because what parents tend to think is important for their child to learn is only the academic skills. And I'm so glad that your earlier group brought up the social emotional piece, which is so connected to the relationship between the caregiver and the child. And they will say, you know, I found the best school, and in that school they're sitting down and they're practicing writing in the 2-year-old room, you know, and you just say, okay, so let's talk about what are some real appropriate ways for your child to learn.
Well, and we're trying to pull apart. People talk about social and emotional, but we're still managing behaviors. Mm-hmm. And what we need to start thinking about, how do we pull the emotional part away from it first and understand the importance of relationship building and attachment. So if we help children in those first 3 to 5 years of life with the capacity to develop relationships with others, it changes and influences what goes on and how they navigate the rest of their academic world. And so we have the emotional development, then it enhances the child's ability to feel safe enough to be socialized, as well as get into the cognitive areas.
An important part of that, I think, also is bringing the family into that conversation, because if you are working with the child at the center and the child's getting all this wonderful sort of how to learn and how to feel their emotions appropriately and express their emotions appropriately, and then they go home into a household where that is not honored, you can undo a lot of what happens at that quality center.
I think part of that too, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think part of that too is parent engagement in general. How welcoming is the center to families? And us remembering that some families had horrible school experiences and they don't even feel comfortable in school environments. You know, and so recognizing where the family's competencies are and their comfort levels in these settings, and as teachers and administrators in these settings to be able to say, okay, let me try to meet you where you are, help you understand, but also learn from you. Tell me about your family culture. How do you want your child to be raised? And make sure that that's a shared partnership and not something that happens to their child.
It's a complex list of things to know. Yes. And as Terry mentioned, no one's doing it for, and even certainly a test score can't go on a website and tell you this.
You know, if 70 to 80% of the children in St. Louis City and St. Louis County are in child care outside the home for 40 or more hours, who's taking care of those children? Are we providing the necessary backdrop for teachers to understand children? We're in such a crisis right now. We're teaching teachers how to manage children, but not understand them. And until we make that shift, we're going to continue to find crisis in the world of early childhood, and it's always going to be reactive as opposed to proactive.
You know, sometimes when we think of when we use terms like access, we think of our poorest in our community. But is access a problem across the board?
Certainly, because think about families that are in shift work. Think about families that work 3 in the afternoon to 11 at night. Where are they finding the space for their child that they can trust.
And the other real touch point is infants and toddlers. We talk about in quality that in actually the licensing regulations are the number of children per caregiver. And for infants and toddlers, it's 4 to 1. It goes up to, and I always get
8 to 1,
8 to 1, and then
10
10 to 1, and as children get older. So when you're talking about 0 to 2, 1 to 4 ratio, that's a lot of teachers needed to take care of the number of children that there are out there, and they're not there. And that time period in particular is really hard to find good care for your children, the quality that you want for your children.
It's not cheap either.
And,
no, it is not.
And some of the things that I would perceive as a quality early childhood experience looks messy.
Yeah.
It's, it's physically messy, it's emotionally messy, and it's kids working out issues among themselves because they need, in the world of early childhood, they're learning to break the rules in order to live within the rules. And so it gets very emotionally messy and socially messy. So if you're walking in, being a dutiful parent and trying to find the best place, and you see a conflict, and you go, I don't want my child in that experience, but it's probably one of the experiences you want to be able to look through and say, they got it.
Donna, Steve, Elizabeth, thank you all so much for your time. Let's go to social media and see what the folks at home are saying.
Great, thank you.
Good job. Okay, well, we've alluded to Oklahoma. Let's go to Oklahoma with the Google Hangout to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Diane Horm. She's a professor at the University of Oklahoma in Tulsa. Okay, Diane, we've kind of been bragging on you a little bit. Let's have you brag on yourself. Oklahoma is, by a lot of accounts, considered a success story. Tell us the results you've seen. Brag on your home state a little bit for us.
Well, probably what we're best known for in Oklahoma is our large publicly funded but voluntary 4-year-old program. But in addition to that, we also have an innovative program to expand and enhance services for infants and toddlers, and the EduCare movement, which is built on Head Start and Early Head Start, but fully funded to have a full day, full year, high quality program. We have 4 centers in Oklahoma, which we're one of the states with the most centers. There's a center in Kansas City. Most states, the 21 across the country, most states only have 1, but in Oklahoma we have 4. And I would say those are the programs we're best known for.
And just to be clear, are parents paying for these out of pocket?
The EduCare centers?
All of what you're talking about here, but what about the 4-year-olds? They are fully funded, is that correct?
Yeah, the 4-year-old program is publicly funded, and we have very high rates of participation in that program, although it's voluntary. I think the latest statistics available showed that 75% of 4-year-olds in Oklahoma attend a free, publicly supported 4-year-old program.
So how'd you do that?
Well, it's taken the state time. I think the 4-year-old program began in 1980, and it began rather small, but over time it's grown to where we are today. And I think that many parents in Oklahoma don't really understand it's different here. When I talk about how unique it is that Oklahoma has this 4-year-old program, they assume that it's everywhere. So in a way, it's now viewed by the public as something that they embrace and want. Like I said, even though it's voluntary to send your children to it, 75% of the 4-year-olds are enrolled in a publicly funded program through the public school.
Without taking the show in a whole nother direction, but we've heard before the legislative will. Is it something that's supported across political lines? I would imagine it would have to be.
Well, I think with such widespread public support of the program, yes, that both parties embrace it.
Okay, what have you learned maybe in this process? What maybe could we steal from you in terms of what you've learned?
Well, I think that many times programs for younger children that are typically served by the public school, the approach has been a targeted approach where it's only for children who come from low-income families or only for children who have certain characteristics. And I think if you want to build public support for a program, having it be available to all the citizens of a state, kind of in a equal access way, helps to build public support. And I also think that in Oklahoma, they had early on some researchers from Georgetown University come in and examine the program for its quality and its impacts on children. And I think those findings also built support for the program because it was found to be good quality and it was found to have impacts on kids in the short term. Now, these Georgetown researchers are continuing their study. I think the first group of children are maybe now that they've studied are now in 5th or 8th grade, so they're coming back to continue the study. But having researchers look at a program critically and over time, I think, has been a key to support as well.
Terry Jones talked about the money it takes, $11,000 a kid. Where do these resources come from? Does it take a lot of money to do it? Can other states, and as I understand, the Oklahoma economy, as I understand, is doing pretty well. Is this something that you can only do when your state's experiencing an uptick in its economy?
Well, I think the per pupil cost for the 4-year-old program in Oklahoma is around $3,600 per child. And that's lower in the last 3 years than it was, say, back in 2010 when the economy was stronger. So the economic downturn that has been, across our country has, the 4-year-old program has taken a little bit of a hit on that. But it still is funded at a level that allows the state to meet certain quality benchmarks, such as some of your earlier speakers were talking about the ratios. So, the 4-year-old program has bachelor degree teachers. It has attractive ratios generally so that the teacher can attend to the children in the classrooms. They try to keep the groups relatively small. So, certainly more funding would help support some other quality features in the program, but it seems to be, at least adequately funded for what they're trying to accomplish.
And are the instructors, are the teachers highly specialized in this area, or are these teachers that have been trained to do elementary education or picking up the 4-year-olds as well?
To work in the 4-year-old program in Oklahoma, you have to have the bachelor's degree and early childhood teacher certification. So the teachers have gone through a specialized program of preparation just for the age group of early childhood, which generally is thought to be birth through age 8.
And I know you do some research as well. I want, before we let you go, just can you talk about the early childhood impact on this achievement gap that we hear so much about later in life?
Right, so specifically the research that my group does at the University of Oklahoma at Tulsa, we partner with our EduCare centers here in town. And like I said, they're a fully funded Head Start model. And we have, what our research suggests is that if children enroll before 18 months of age and continue in this high quality early childhood environment, that we can prevent the achievement gap from forming. If children enroll at a later point in time, certainly every year they spend moves them closer to that middle class norm of 100 on standardized achievement tests. But we find if they start early, we can really, the power of a high quality early childhood program and starting early, we think we can prevent the achievement gap. And I think that's an amazing finding because we spend a lot of money as a country trying to remediate that later on. And in general, it would be better to prevent it from ever forming than to spend all the money later remediating it.
Diane Horn from University of Oklahoma in Tulsa, thanks for your time and for all of your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, sticking with it, we'll transition to the next table. One of the folks you've already met, get situated here, Francella Jackson. We know each other from your work with the East St. Louis Police Department, where you are the Director of Community Programs. We've already met Steve and Julius Anthony, founder, Early Childhood Education Prep School. Let's talk a little bit more about access as it pertains to children along different socioeconomic lines and the impact of poverty on this topic we're having right now, Julius. It's different for different families, we said in the last table.
Sure, absolutely. I think a lot of the conversation that has gone forth so far has talked about how parents can have access to in terms of what's available. But in my mind, access also has to do with what is culturally competent for the families that are typically consumers of this market. I think that a lot of times those people that are, those persons who are in positions of making decisions don't really always understand who the consumer is. And I think a lot of it has to do with there's a missing voice at that level. And so this whole issue of cultural competency is big in this industry. We talk about it a lot, but we really don't do anything about it. So what is cultural competency? It has to do with really understanding the distinctions of a community and their needs. And I think a lot of times, basically those of us who are in the position of making these kinds of decisions around access don't really understand the families that are typically growing up in poverty, and particularly families of color.
So how are we moving forward? How can we move forward in a more inclusive way in this conversation?
I think there are a number of ways that we can move forward. Particularly, I'd like to talk about what we're doing in the greater East St. Louis area. We have formed East Side Aligned. That's the collective impact. Because we believe that every child in the greater East St. Louis area, given a level playing field, can succeed. When we're adopted the Ready by 21 model, in which a child in that community is ready for work, school, and success, and just life by the time they turn 21. So it's some of those things. We can no longer continue to work in isolation. We have to do this thing collectively to make sure that our children succeed. We also have to make sure our children know that we believe in them. Sometimes just a caring adult can make a difference to a child in poverty and whether they succeed or not.
And so I'm thinking of specifically at this age as well. There are a lot of factors that may be going on in their lives. How do those impact them? The impacts of poverty on a home, how are they impacting these youngest kids?
It's impacting them, again, in a number of ways, because it's hard for a child to concentrate, to learn when they are hungry. It's hard for a child who has not had a good night's sleep because of things that are going on in the home and in the community that they could not sleep. It's hard for a child who did not have a bed to sleep in that night. Those are some of the things that people, or some of those children living in poverty, they face. It's very, very hard to learn, to concentrate, to do anything when you're living like that. But let me say this, I also do know that there are a lot of children who came out of poverty. I was considered a person in poverty. I didn't know that until I went to college. We often say that. But the community and someone cared, someone gave me a chance. So those children need that same opportunity, and they can succeed, again, with a level playing field.
Were you exposed to any kind of early childhood education, pre-kindergarten or in that age range?
Actually, it was just kindergarten. But again, back then, the community cared. Everywhere you went, you learned.
I think Francine has just explained well some of the issues that children of poverty are dealing with. But who's in the classroom ready to greet that type of child? And what is the program that's ready to embrace the kinds of issues that those children are dealing with? That's the missing voice. There's an imbalance in the collective conversation in this industry of early childhood around what's culturally competent and relevant for children who are growing up in poverty. And if we don't think of some more non-traditional ways of really helping those children to succeed, if all of the research that you shared with us at the beginning of the show is true, why are so many children growing up in poverty not having success, aren't having the success. They're not, because there's this issue of, yes, we talked a lot about the social, emotional stuff, but really the stakes are high now. When our children come into the kindergarten classroom, they're expected to be able to read by the time they finish kindergarten. And so we don't give a lot of thinking around not just what's best in terms of social and emotional, but we need some thinking around what are those kinds of learning and cognitive things that our children are going to need, because that is a cultural distinction for our children.
Here's the challenge, because childhood is changing. We get it. Okay, childhood is changing, but child development's not. So so you want to be sensitive and culturally sensitive and understand the customer, but if they're asking for something that is developmentally inappropriate for a child, so yes, kids are being, the demands to enter some of the elementary schools the stakes are getting higher because they're pushing down curriculum from first grade and kindergarten to early childhood. And kids are not ready to, emotionally and intellectually ready to grab all of that stuff. So I think the challenge is, how do we help parents understand what is developmentally appropriate, how we can achieve the academic readiness for the child in a way that is built on the internal structures, the infrastructure that children need to do it. And we're pushing kids so hard.
Well, I frankly believe the best practices are already out there. We know what really works. The thing is that we're not implementing what really works. There's all kinds of programs that really effectively, I believe, deal with the socio-emotional piece of children, as well as deal with those more cognitive things with a culturally competent slant. We need to start looking at some of those kinds of things in order to embrace, particularly the children in the St. Louis metropolitan region. Look at the scores in our St. Louis public school system. Look at what the students or the children are dealing out with in Ferguson, Florissant. And all of the scores is based on research around third grade reading and math scores. Children aren't succeeding well in those areas. And the research suggests that children who get a great early childhood education, particularly from the cognitive perspective, they do better when it comes to third grade success. And so we have to start looking at what are those really good practices out there that are already working. We know what works. Let's start implementing some of those things.
And just those basic needs. Every child deserves to have a level playing field. And I can't emphasize that enough. And ironically, we have a lot of children coming out of East St. Louis and that whole area who do succeed. But we know that in addition to some of the things that that were lacking, they had the community, they had the church, they had other families. And we need to go back to simply the old neighborhood kind of thing, where where it was truly a village that helped with the child.
Hold that thought. We're going to build a little village here and bring everyone back. But to give us a second to do that and to hear what you were saying, let's go back to #StayTunedSTL. That's what the raccoon tail there is for. Steve, I cut you off. What were you saying?
You're asking somebody that's over 60 to recall. I don't know. No, there's a tremendous amount of research out there that really talks about even when kids have their basic physical needs met, that if the emotional frameworks and the attachments in the relationships are not built, that they will die of failure to thrive. So it's an integration of so much. So if kids are getting their basic needs met in a loving, caring way, then that gives them the opportunity to know that they have an emotional partner. If they have an emotional partner, they take social risk. When they feel like they have this emotional partner to help them with their emotional and social piece, then they attack the academic risk necessary to be successful. And they're not isolated, and they all have to be woven together, but we have to study them differently right now because we don't fully understand.
Okay, so the vibe on Twitter, I think, is we're preaching to the choir. People get it, but how? How do we do it?
I just think we've done a really nice job of outlining some bits around quality, but I really want to make sure that we talk about the whole early childhood system. And it's been brought up a little bit. Children have to be healthy. Their families have to be functioning well. You know, I think we've got to look at involving the healthcare system, mental health, social services. Everybody's got to be around the table and agree that this is how we're going to move forward. And that's happening in some states. I don't know if you've heard of the maternal early childhood home visitation program coming out of the Affordable Health Care Act, but they're working on systems building in different states or providing funding around that. And they're struggling at times with our departments playing well together and folks coming to the table and really figuring out how a whole system embraces our families.
So what that means is that we can't just look at it school district by school district, school district by school district, or early care facility by early care facility. We really need to take that up and look at a statewide level, what we're doing, how, the funding comes in this like spaghetti bowl type of funding streams with money coming from all sorts of different areas. How do we organize that so that the most funds are going to the best quality facilities? So that when a district receives state funding to implement early care, they can look at both within their system, but also, working with their community partners so that the community-based organizations can feed into that district with a really lovely transition period. Thank you.
No, this is the one Terry had. He didn't. And
Terry's my neighbor.
Okay, yeah.
So,
okay, so it sounds. Are you talking about like maybe more of a statewide program? Do we need what Oklahoma has, where this is a state-run deal where they've done it so long, people just assume it's that way everywhere?
I think particularly in East St. Louis, again, I can't talk enough about the collective impact and East Side of Line, because our goal is to make sure every child succeed, create the framework in which to do that. So we're ahead of St. Louis, actually, with our collective impact efforts. We're doing a great job in trying to build an agenda around children and to make sure they succeed. So that's one way of trying to address it. We have to come together. Again, no more silos.
And part of what that research we were talking about earlier, what those children got in North Carolina in the 1970s were well child and sick child visits. They got nutrition at school. This was a wraparound of comprehensive services. It wasn't just about education. And I want to kind of unpack this notion, because I think emotional can feel squishy, and I'm a psychologist, I understand that. What we're talking about when we talk about emotional regulation is the ability to delay gratification, the ability to plan for the future. We're talking about skills that children are building in the earliest years that allow them to refrain from smoking, to push away from that unhealthy food that is leading to the obesity epidemic that we've got. So these aren't squishy terms that we're talking about. These have very real consequences for how people behave and make decisions.
Key elements for success, academic success: language development and self-control. And what I'm seeing in schools, I'm doing a lot of professional development for teachers. What we're seeing in teachers is they're trying to control kids, as opposed to having them develop self-control. That's where the messiness comes in. And the key element of being able to build these relationships and the attachments. It sounds like a soft word, but it is a lifelong impact on our life.
It is.
Yeah.
I want to be sure that we get back to how do we get this done. I mean, we are the choir here. We're talking to the choir. These are political problems.
Sure.
They require political will. Somehow the agenda has to move to the political level. And these arguments, whether they're economic, whether they're health, whatever they are, how do we get this? Child advocates in Missouri got so excited this year because there were some tiny little incremental steps where we said, okay, maybe the foundation formula ought to include early childhood. Okay, maybe we can talk about quality in the state instead of saying we're not going to talk about quality in the state. We shouldn't have to be excited about those little things. These are things that need to be high on the political agenda.
And it needs systematic investment. It needs to be looking department by department at the state level of how they feed into making this entire system that Donna talked about working for children. And as we said, whether it's because it's good for us economically in the long term, or whether it's because every single child deserves to have success in school and in life, it doesn't matter. We got to get it done. And it takes the political will. And we all have to keep advocating and keep working with our legislators to say, here's how it can work, here's where it can work. We're not alone in this.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, but I'm going to do it online at staytuned.9net.org, where this show will continue. One of you did it for me, but I'll repeat it. It's worth saying again that this is part of the 9 Network's initiatives, American Graduate. Thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. So if you could say anything, everything gets so politicized. They're doing it in Oklahoma. Why can't we do it here? What would you say to a legislator? Is there a common sense answer to this as to why or how we can do this?
I would say you're going to pay for it eventually. Do you want to pay for it now and get a $7 return on the $1 you spend, or do you want to pay for it later? And you're going to pay for it later in terms of social services, in terms of corrections, in terms of a whole host of services. And we know it's harder to remediate later on in development, things that we could prevent early on in life.
What I would also say, and it sometimes found effective, what about your child? What if it was your child?
Sure.
What if we use the standard that if it's not okay for my child, it's not okay for anybody? And I think part of our work as advocates is understand the families of legislators. I mean, talk about where they're coming from specifically. So the macro and the kind of micro
and right now, I don't have a whole lot of faith in our legislation, and I hate to say that, but I do have hope in our business community, and we are beginning to see our business community step up, and I think that's one of the secrets to all of this. If we can get businesses to step up and advocate for early childhood, and I'm guaranteed you're going to see politicians move.
The businesses have run the numbers, so to speak.
That's right.
We're talking about workforce development, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about creating the kids that actually qualify to go to college, that actually qualify to serve in the military, that actually can hold a job, that have enough self-regulation and all those pieces put together to show up every day and be a productive person, to vote. I mean, we're talking about creating the citizens. So it is always amazing to me that it isn't just automatic that that corporations are working with our social systems and government to just create the best workforce possible.
But there has to be some equity. It seems like those centers that are of high quality, they're typically not in neighborhoods of poverty. And so if the business community is going to get involved, there should be some equity across the board. Put some money into communities where you don't see a lot of high quality centers, because that impacts the workforce development as well. There just has to be some equity across the board.
Well, we're involved in the Flance Center. We just built down at 20th and O'Fallon, and it's a $14 million project right in the heart of 6106. So there's a group of people, partners with Urban Strategies and McCormick Barron, who have made a deep commitment to the community, and we have business leaders, really rallying around the cry. So it's happening.
Yeah, but that's one center, right?
got to start.
I agree. I'm just saying that there has to be more equity. That's all.
We're dealing with the state. We need to remind ourselves that to cut taxes has budget challenges, is underfunding its foundation formula by its own terms by $600 million. Taking on early childhood education right is probably at least $250 million process. So that is a very steep hill to climb.
So is there something radical we need to do and like take it out of higher education, say it's going to be more bang for the buck here? Or is it...
School districts are concerned that they might be mandated to in fact take it out of K through 12 and reallocate it out of those years into 3 and 4 year olds.
There ought to be a public outcry about that. It can't be the solution. That cannot be the solution.
You know, we lost state money because they gave it to the veterans. Now who's going to argue? It was just a reallocation of money, and so we had to lay people off, and across the state we were struggling. And but they gave it to the vets.
You're kind of arguing.